Hello everybody. So this is the first video lecture on the topic of race and ethnicity. This is a chapter that in my early part of my career I was sort of reluctant to cover, or because I was under the assumption or the belief that because I was a white person I didn't have race, and that's precisely not true. The idea that race, we all have race. My race just happens to be white. The fact that I'm white means I have had the privilege of not really even realizing I have race. I mean, my whole hesitation to teach the subject is grounded in the privilege that I have of not never really being made aware or sensitive to race. So it's a topic that I like to talk about. I like to read about. It's increasingly becoming the of the three, race, class, and gender in sociology. It's increasingly becoming the one that most interests me these days. I'm doing the most reading about. Of course, it's also very timely and a very contemporary issue. The first really important point to make about the topic of race and ethnicity, it's what we call race, is what we call a social construct. It's an idea that we as a culture have created and we agree on. We have given meaning to, much like the example that I've used in other lectures about the dollar bill, which is simply a piece of fiber that we collectively treat or understand to have a certain meaning, and then we interact with that. It's an idea we've socially created. This image here is really one of them. It's a fairly popular image, but it attempts to illustrate the social constructiveness of race, and particularly or specifically how that construction has changed over time. So what you have are different people, and on their t-shirts they have years and what their status would have been, what their racial or ethnic status would have been. And we'll talk about ethnicity, how those things get confused in just a second. But so we'll just start over here with this white guy here. His is 1790. He would be have been labeled as a free white. In 1860 he was simply a white. In 1970 he was also white. This person down here in 1870 was Chinese. In 1980 they were categorized as other, and by 2000 it was Asian. What are some of the others? Up here you have slave, Negro, Negro. Oh, here's one. Here's a good one about how we have confused race and ethnicity. Mexican, referring to the country of one's origin. White, referring to one's complexion. And then in 1990 was a Hispanic white, which is really a way of putting together both race and ethnicity. Hispanic referring to where someone is from. White referring to the complexion of one's skin. So it just illustrates that and this is another sort of illustration of privilege. This guy's here is really the only one that hasn't changed, right? You have slave, mulatto, and Negro, like everybody else's has changed. But that is sensical from the sociological and historical perspective, that race is an idea that was constructed as a way to benefit the privileged. So the people that had the power and the authority to do so created race, or created mechanisms to divide people up, and gave themselves the higher status, right? Well, let me back up. So what is race? Race, by sociological definition, there is only one race. So if we were in a class together, I might ask you that question: how many races are there? And sometimes people would say, well, there's three. There's white, brown, and black. I remember growing up and learning the song, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, right? When I asked students this, they didn't learn the same song, but red and yellow would have referred to people of Asian descent. Red would have refers to Native American, and black, of course, to black. But anyway, the point is that race is the idea that people are fundamentally biologically different enough that we can sort them up into categories. Race is both described as both let me sort of go back. So it's a socially constructed idea, right? It's an idea that we as a culture have collectively agreed upon. It's an agreed upon idea that is imposed by the powerful people. So in this case, you see an illustration of slave captors. And in the United States, the concept of race emerged right alongside the incorporation or the adoption of slavery as a way to make clear who was slave and who was free. If you looked a certain way, you were given a certain label, and that meant you were likely slave. If you looked a different way, that meant you belonged to a different group and you had different privileges or you had different freedoms because of the way you looked and the label that you were given. We say that race is embedded, so it's an idea that we have collectively agreed upon that then gets embedded into a culture. And what we mean by that is that our culture, people like to say, well, only when there's no such thing as race will racism end, and that we have to quit noticing it. But the thing is that it is everywhere, right? Neighborhoods are sorted out by race. Music is sorted out by race. TV stations are even sorted out by race, right? It's like, even if we say we don't want to acknowledge these racial differences, well, much like gender, though not exactly the same, but much like gender, these structures or these patterns of interacting are part of our culture, right? They are embedded within our culture. There's an author who wrote a book called White Fragility, and she argues that people are not racist, but structures are racist. And what that means is that the way structures have allocated resources and positions are such that the pattern is that the people who have more power are of one racial group and the people who have less power. And so I come in off the street and wanting to be a part of this organization, and I look around, and where are the people that look like me? Well, the people that look like me, and people that look like me are more likely to be in powerful positions. Okay, I see where my place is because those people look like me. If I look different and I come into an organization and I look around and I don't see anyone that looks like me in leadership, the people that look like me are at those lower level, well, I can understand then, or I assume, or I act as if, or I expect to be in those particular positions. So that's what we mean by it's sort of embedded in culture, and why sociologists are so keen to point out that it's critical that people of color see themselves represented in other positively in all places in culture and society. Okay, so here's a really big sociological point that will be on a quiz question, for at least one quiz question, and that's myth. That the idea is that race is both a myth and a reality. And so the question is, how is it both a myth and a reality? Well, let's start with the real, right? It's real because people really do look different. I mean, if you look on that picture there, people really do look different. But it's a myth because these are simply superficial differences. These are differences much like if we had cats, right? If we had all the house cats, their fur colors would be different, but they're still all house cats, and they're still all one breed of cat, and they can all intermix with each other, right? There's no subspecies of house cat. They're all cats. What's different about them are these superficial fur colors. And so that's really different, is that people are really different. But we are not so different as to sort each other out in this sort of hierarchy of human and subhuman, right? Furthermore, so there's really only one race, and that's a human race. Now, once upon a time in human history, it is assumed that there were 6 versions of humans on the planet. And if that were still the case, right, one of them is the Homo sapiens, and then the Neanderthals, and I was learning about another group just the other night. There would have been multiple races, but all of those other groups died out, and now we only have one, and the differences between us are simply superficial. So it's a myth, right? But we treat this myth as if it is real. And in that sense, we give it real meaning, right? right? So differences in appearance are real. It's a myth that there's subhuman groups, but this myth of an idea is really used as a way to sort people out, right? And that's what we mean by race is both a myth and a reality. Okay, I'm going to stop, and the next topic is I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by ethnicity and how that gets confused with race.